After a wild week when markets were in chaos, officials have come out this week and predictably they're saying nothing to see here, attempting to calm a situation that they know is heading in the wrong direction, especially where it comes to the labor market. Federal Reserve officials, even they know the unemployment rate and unemployment itself is about to surge. So, quite naturally, as an official, as a central banker, their instinct is to try to calm as much of the situation as possible, trying to keep that snowball, which is already heading downhill, from turning into an avalanche at this early stage. For example, Jeremy Siegel on Monday, prominent economist from the University of Pennsylvania, CNBC, after all the events of the weekend, with the markets melting down at that point, he says, I need the Federal Reserve to cut 75 basis points today. And not only do we need a 75 basis point cut today, we need another 75 basis point cut from the Fed in September. That was on Monday as the world looked really bad. Just a couple days ago, Mr. Siegel was brought back on CNBC and he had quite suspiciously a very, very different message. Here's what CNBC said about his second appearance. Siegel caused a stir Monday when he told CNBC that Fed Chair Jerome Powell and his colleagues should institute an emergency 75 percentage point decrease now and followed it up with one in September. However, quote, I no longer certainly think it's necessary, but I do want Powell to move down to 4% as fast as possible, Siegel said during a phone interview. Would it be bad? No. But would it be necessary? No, not at this time. And you could tell the guy was coerced into completely walking back what he said before. He wants the Fed to cut because he knows the situation's bad. And maybe just as importantly, the Federal Reserve and officials there, they know the situation is bad, but they also know that at this type of circumstance, the best course of action for them is to basically lie to everyone and say, hey, everything is just fine. Maybe the labor market will head in the right direction. Who knows? The future is uncertain. When as we go further and further here, the future is less and less uncertain. It's certainly where it comes to the Goldilocks scenario. Goldilocks has been priced out of the marketplace entirely. So, Steve, Mr. Van Meter, let's bring you in here. First of all, what a crazy week it was before that. But then, in many respects, this week has been, I don't want to say crazier. That's not the right word, but it's been interesting to say the least.
Yeah, Jeff, because when we talk about, these Fed speakers, and one thing I thought was really interesting is, of course, a number of them are always going to come out during any form of a perceived crisis. And the first thing they kind of hinted at was, well, 1 month or one set of data isn't enough. We'd like to see 3. You immediately see, hey, we got to push the goalpost back here a little bit because I know we said a lot of things, but, it could just be a one-off report and that maybe the soft landing narrative has just been delayed because, Jeff, monetary policy does work with long and variable lags. And we just don't know that, maybe in a couple months, everything will be fine. But that's exactly what they wanted to present was a unified front. We decided not to cut because we just didn't think the time was right because they were nervous. I think that's the case here. They don't want to tip the market kind of the wrong way. In this case, now they bought themselves to mid-September. The only question now is, will the labor market hold up long enough? And that's a big question I have because as we talked about before the show, initial unemployment claims, which is really now the only data we should be watching is the weekly claims, that came down. And that looks really good. The problem is continued unemployment claims, well, they went up a little bit. Now, we do know that when economies recover, initial claims will go down and lead continued claims. So we could say a counterpoint here, and I could make the argument that maybe the market was right and that this was just an aberration and the labor market's in good shape. Or what we're going to find out is perhaps once the summer season is over, we go back to school, that there aren't enough jobs for all the people that are going to lose them, and that there's not going to be enough jobs for the people on unemployment to get back in the workforce. And this is going to slowly keep spiraling up until it gets out of control.
Well, I think that's what's clear from the Federal Reserve's perspective, which is, again, it's important because even though the Fed, enormous trouble with the Fed, if they're saying we see problems ahead, that's really something you should pay attention to because if they see it, then it must really be that obvious. And that we had a number of Fed speakers this week who were basically hinting at, yeah, we can see it coming too. And so they're in maybe not quite crisis mode, but they're moving in that direction where they're saying, we need to be careful about not making what is already a bad situation and what's going to become an even worse situation. We don't want to make it even worse than it necessarily needs to be, because that avalanche is coming. The snowball's heading down the hill. So let's not add any momentum to that snowball as it goes down the hill. I'll give you an example here. Richard Barkin, who's the head of the Richmond Fed, he came out and said, okay, we know the labor market's in trouble, but it could also turn positive. We need to see more data. As you were just saying, Steve, Barkin said, okay, yeah, the last payroll report was a little weak, but I need to see 2 or 3 more in order for me to be convinced. But yet he also said this: we're seeing job growth, but the question you have to ask is, how long does a low hiring, low firing environment persist? And we already know that's highly unusual. A low hiring environment is already halfway into a recession, if not further into a recession to begin with, which already suggests that the labor market's in substantial trouble. So they know that. They're admitting that we're already in a weird and very dangerous situation as it is. But then Barkin continued with, it doesn't have to weaken. It could also strengthen if businesses start to think that, hey, the opportunities out there are significant. And you know what he was really saying there. What he's saying is that, okay, second half rebound, all that, maybe that's gone. But maybe if we start talking about Fed rate cuts, we talk about rate. We don't even need to cut rates, because if we cut rates too soon, that looks panicky. But if we look like if we start talking about rate cuts in the future, done in very measured, methodical fashion, that might give businesses something to latch onto. And then they don't fire people. They can say, oh, the Fed's cutting rates. Let's start hiring people back. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. But again, it's par for the course given what we're facing.
You know, Jeff, what's ridiculous is that it actually does work, because we know forward guidance that people sit around and they worry and wonder what the Fed's going to do. And though it does get in the decision-making process, and they may think, hey, you know what? I do want to get rid of some people. Boy, but they're talking about a rate cut. And boy, the big view here is that people will come out and spend. And so there is something to this. The problem is it's not based on reality, and that is the issue. I think what's making the Fed nervous
You're
here,
saying
Jeff,
that this is just a theory that sounds plausible. It actually doesn't work in practice. Is that what you're saying, Steve?
oh, absolutely. But I think it buys them a little time. I don't think it works, but I think it puts a little ice on things. And I think that's the key here, because what does the Fed really care about? Is it inflation? Is it the labor market or any of these other things? No, it's the 2-year Treasury yield. And what is the 2-year yield right now? Tell them, hey, idiots, we may be on the cusp of a major policy mistake here, and maybe the 2-year yields will go back up, and like it did the last couple times it's dipped here. And I think that's what the Fed's nervous about. They're seeing financial conditions tighten. They're not sure because they don't want to make a shock move and then turn out to be on the wrong side of this. So what do you do when you're in that position? You go out and you talk up your book or your game plan, and you see if there's a reaction. If there is, hey, guess what? You buy yourself maybe a month or two, and you can see how the data pans out. If it doesn't work, well, then I guess you've got your September meeting coming up.
Yeah, and the question is, you're right. What does the labor market data look like in between now and then? I mean, forget about consumer prices. We know what's going to happen with consumer prices, because basically every company in America has told us, hey, we're cutting prices here. We don't see a whole lot of demand. Everybody from airlines to Disney. Disney has come out just recently. We've been talking about Disney for a long time. It has something to do with the fact that you are a regular over there at Disney, and you have been saying for quite some time it's pretty dead over at the theme park. And lo and behold, Disney comes out and says, yeah, guess what? We don't have as many visitors. And when the visitors come, they don't seem to be spending as much money as they normally do, or at least as much as we would like them to. And so from everything from travel and leisure to basic necessities, companies are saying we're cutting prices to try to maintain demand. So we know the consumer price problem is dealt with, but now we go into the other side of that, which is, why are companies cutting prices? Why is demand so weak? And that's where we start talking about the labor market. And you're right, that the idea of a rate cut is just, hey, maybe somebody latches onto this and it has some impact. But from the Fed's perspective right now, it's like, okay, let's hope that's the case. But we're more concerned about just making sure that people are calm so that we can even have the chance of getting people to latch onto our very measured and very careful rate cutting plans. We don't want to say we're going to cut by 50 or 75 basis points in September, let alone in August, because that will spark more panic than anything else. At the end of the day, you and I both know, Steve, once the Fed starts cutting, that's usually it anyway. So the best they can hope for is just let's pretend that everything is fine because we know it is not fine.
Yeah, and the stock market reacted like, hey, Fed might cut rates, let's all come in and buy the dip. And so, I get it. If they react too soon, then people think, okay, what does the Fed know that I don't know? And I get it. I'm not saying, which is nothing, but nevertheless, we have to keep the mystique of the Federal Reserve here intact because the labor market is slowing down. And that's the problem. Demand around here, Jeff, is actually weaker than normal. And I said this months ago, and everyone that worked here said, no, don't worry, it's going to turn around. But it didn't. And so in the summer months where you need a lot of demand to carry you through the winter months, well, what's going to happen is employers are going to have absolutely no choice. They've been cutting hours because they want to believe. Everybody really wants to believe that the soft landing is going to be achieved. And probably maybe now more than ever they believe that. The reality is, after school starts, we know here seasonally we go through kind of a trial. And what that means is we're likely to see more and more people lose their job. And if that doesn't turn around by the holiday season, if the consumer doesn't come out and spend here, it is game over. And now we're facing perhaps maybe a repeat of what we've seen in Marches past, where, of course, finally everything comes to roost and equity markets get a reality check.
Well, that was one thing that San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly said just this past week. Just what you said, Steve, that in conversations, it was clear that she was having conversations with businesses in their district, and they were all telling her the same thing. They're like, look, we've been cutting back on hours. We've been cutting back. We've been reducing our payrolls through attrition, but we haven't really been firing people. But here's what she said. Firms are keeping their workforces stable or they're letting them slow through attrition, but they also say we need to shrink the size of our payrolls. We just haven't really seen that in large scale yet. So she knows what's coming. Businesses are telling her, look, we're getting to that point where we need to start laying off workers. We haven't gotten there yet, but that is coming. The Fed knows it's coming. And once that dam bursts, if it hasn't already, that's why the unemployment rate was such a huge signal. It suggests that dam may have burst already. So the Fed knows that we're at that point, if not beyond it, where these layoffs are going to start. The unemployment rate is going to start to really go up here. And so what do you do in that situation? You can't make it worse by saying, oh my God, we need to panic too when everybody else is panicking. So everything that you're going to hear from now until probably September, maybe in August, I don't think so, but until September, everything they're going to say to you is, it's fine. That was all an overreaction. Don't worry about a thing. And then September will come and they'll be like, yeah, we're going to do 50 basis points here. So everything is fine up until you realize, holy crap, these people have been lying to us the entire time, which, by the way, is exactly what they're doing. Their entire job is to lie to you and tell you that everything is just fine up until the moment where they start to panic too.
Yes. And then the best part is when they panic, it doesn't actually do anything because, and you see this in the news, and I love this, Jeff. You see actually commentary about, but if the Fed cuts, boy, it puts immediately money into the economy. It's like, okay, like
where?
Since
How?
when?
Where does that money come from?
Yeah, I don't know,
What?
But I love how it always works. There's a long and variable lag when we raise rates, but it's just ding near instantaneous when we cut them. But that's kind of the whole problem here that we're seeing is, you look back at what Powell, you go back to the pandemic, he was the savior of the pandemic in the eyes of the world. He aggressively cut rates and everything turned around and his victory lap wasn't as long as he should have taken it. Now, what's going to happen this time is he doesn't want to go down in history at the end of his term as the guy that lets fall into recession. And he knows that in the past, Fed chiefs have really kind of waited too long. So he doesn't want to be too early because then he looks panicky, but he doesn't want to wait too long because he has to believe in the myth of the Federal Reserve and say, look, I'm right on top of this. I saved us once. Look, put the Superman cape on. You thought Ben Bernanke was great. You got nothing. I'm way better than him. And that's kind of, I think, why he's going to make that move in September. I think you're right. He wanted to do it the last beam, but it was just on the edge of too soon. By September, if we continue to see the continued unemployment claims rise, he's going to have some view. We'll have the CPI report next week. So he's going to have a little bit more data and a non-farm payroll report. Maybe things go in his favor, or maybe they don't.
Yeah, he has to be kicking himself about not cutting rates in July, given everything that's happened since then, because, I'm almost positive he would have. It just, all these other Fed officials, we're not confident about this. We need more data than everything else. But if you need 3 different payroll reports in order to understand the economic situation, then you're already way too late as it is. Everything from the SOM rule, which is not a real-time indicator, that's a lagging indicator too. That one got triggered. So there's any number of already data points that we have that's out already. And again, these Fed officials are saying we know what's coming. We just don't know what we can do about it right now, because I think what really happened last week is the market reaction to everything caught them off guard. They really thought that, okay, we don't need to cut in July because we'll talk about a cut in September. Remember what Jay Powell said at his press conference? There could be a series of cuts this year. And he thought that talking about a series of cuts would be enough to calm the situation, when, of course, as we know, cuts don't really do anything. And if rate cuts don't do anything, then talking about rate cuts is really not going to do anything. And the markets had a violent reaction because the situation has indeed changed. And so has the narrative. I think that's one of the biggest points, too, is that the narrative has shifted even in official circles. They were talking about, we're not confident about inflation. Now they're all talking about, businesses are looking like they're going to start firing workers. But maybe it'll get better if we talk about more interest rates or interest rate cuts. So the narrative is shifting. And the fact that the narrative is shifting tells you that the situation has changed enough that even the Fed can't pretend anymore that everything is just strong and resilient. Now we're at the stage where it's become clear that it's not strong and resilient.
Yeah, Jeff, I agree with you completely. What you're saying is we're very close, if not already at the inflection point. And this is really where, even though we know the rate cuts don't actually do anything, this is where, if the Fed did want everyone to believe they did something, and maybe there was some hope they actually did something, but they won't, this is where you'd want to see them step in and say, hey, look, this was all according to plan. You know what? The soft landing, it was delayed a little bit. Maybe we were just a little too tight. We're going to back off a little bit and then watch this thing run. And then when it doesn't, as we know it won't, there will be more cuts by the end of the year. And then there'll be cuts in the beginning of next year and probably on the way back to zero.
Steve, don't you think that was a plan? I think that was the plan. That was their idea, was that what caught them off guard was the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate surged past their threshold. And they thought, oh, crap, we're behind. They were going to do that. They were going to say, we got this. We did this. We were going to, yes, this is just a little slowdown that we were forecasting. We told you the economy would slow down. It's going to gently glide into the soft landing, and a few rate cuts just as insurance to make sure it does. And then the unemployment rate surged, and they're like, oh, crap, we missed it.
But they talked it down. That was the funny thing. They said, oh, this is just an aberration because back to school. Soon as school gets back, watch. There's going to be a flood of hiring. Okay, well, we're going to find out real quick here.
As soon as school gets back, there's going to be a 50 or 75 basis point rate cut. That's what's going to happen when school gets back.